No. I'm teaching about. Yes. Yeah. Outside, export. Whereas I think that's how that yes.
And it came and very interesting on the history of the Napoleon song. It's interesting that someone from another country came in and made a great move on the Napoleon. This movie has been really successful all around the world, but it was not intentional. Because we are not very aware of our tradition, of our
others would like to share. We undervalue our own aspects. We need to put together.
Di là non sono cessazioni al momento.
So we can start. Probably other people will come.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, sorry, we should start now. Okay. Good morning. Sorry, my Italian is not just, I can only speak English. So I apologize for that. But just you will persevere with me and the points I try to share with you. I've been asked to speak on smart cities, sustainable cities, and the relationship between smart and sustainable cities, which seems to be quite topical at the moment within Europe in particular. I've got three sets of slides, three presentations, which I wanted to really talk forward we start, to see how you would like to proceed and what sort of sequence. I've got 3 different things. One's on smart and sustainable cities. Search for world-class performance. The other one is urban influence. It's not a very topical issue to do with smart and sustainable cities. We need to measure smartness of where we want to define what we should be. And the third one is a case study on a mass retrofit, which is part of the smart strategy to actually try and upgrade or improve the existing fabric of the city rather than focus on redevelopment. So, do you have any preferences? Before we begin, because obviously try to make it much your attendance. The urban indicators presentation is quite high level, quite generic, quite critically, hopefully insightful, as to the state of the art. That's probably the most demanding no competition or anything like that. The actual framework and what this national methodology is. Smart and Sustainable Cities presentation is an overview. It does set the parameters of the subject, and then obviously the case study is something quite specific. So do you have any preferences upon how you want to sort of me to lead you into the subject? Or do you want me to choose? Vote? We're trying to be participative, yeah. Smart cities are supposed to be an exercise in participative governance, yes? So we can, put that into practice, can't we? If we agree upon how we want to proceed before we start. Any preferences?
Maybe we can start with an overview.
The overview, yes.
And after the urban indicators.
Okay. Yeah. So you're going for the sort of pyramid thing. Let's go for the generic and then let's go to the specific.
It's my
point.
idea.
Yeah. Sounds very sensible. Anybody else?
I would like to have an in-depth information about the third part, retrofit.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, my discussion, my thesis discussion on retrofit. So I would like to have more information about that.
Okay. So whatever happens, you want quite a bit of time allocated to that, even if it came last. Yes. Okay. So treat that seriously. The message. Yeah. Okay. Any other points? Okay. So the consensus, by default, is the overview, what's a smart and sustainable city, and then the second one, urban indicators, and then the third one, let's use that knowledge to then have a really meaningful look at and exploration of urban retrofits on a mass scale. Yeah. Okay. All right. We'll stick to that then. I would have chosen that too. So there we go. We're on the same mind. So that's the last one. I don't know what that one. The first one. Last one. Yes, that's the one. Okay. You have a yes. So in terms of, I express that very touchy. Not experienced that. Very sophisticated. Yeah. Okay. Morning. Okay, yeah, sorry, I didn't introduce myself, did I? Just for, in case there's any ambiguity. My name's Mark Deakin. I'm from Edinburgh, Napier University in Scotland. I'm Professor of Built Environment there. And obviously, Ramal's invited me to talk to you today about smart and sustainable cities, and also to give a talk tomorrow at the Input Conference. So, if anybody's going to the conference tomorrow, then you can skip my presentation, because the material for tomorrow's talk is here as well. Sorry?
Where will be the lesson tomorrow?
Tomorrow morning, about midday.
Yeah, no, you will start at 11.
11 apparently, yeah. Okay, so we'll slow things down today, okay? Because you're very interested people who want to learn and want to know, whereas others just want to, be aware of in conferences and things. I find myself anyway. Okay. So, smart cities, the search for world-class performance. The search for world-class performance is one of the few things I can find which is actually a common denominator to smart cities. I search for ever-increasing performance, for cities to become world-class performers in that regard, and smart somehow being a definition or a quality which defines that level of performance. To be smart in your own right isn't much of a motivator, It has to have greater meaning, it has to have, wider significance, more purchase on the world, and it is a drive to make cities perform better, either economically or socially, or environmentally, or culturally, etc., etc. So hence the publication there, the search for world-class performance, which we'll come to towards the end of the presentation. Most of the first few slides will be definitional and formative, and then hopefully we'll get to some summative component towards the end. Okay, so if you do a word search, obviously, on Google, all these particular terms will be associated with smart cities. That was about 12 months ago. It may be much more extensive now, because the subject has gone into hyperdrive, as a point of interest for academics and practitioners alike now. No doubt due to Horizon 2020 and the EU funding mechanism for research and technical development, and the smart cities and communities program, which has also been launched by the European Commission. And then we did a research project for the European Commission. I think it was about 2008, 2009, called Smart Cities. At the time, it was the second project funded by the European Commission on smart cities. The other one was about from Walter Giffinger, you may have come across, on ranking of cities and using some sort of smart index to try and rank cities in terms of their performance. So again, a little bit of overlap there. Ours was about innovation within service provision by cities, and in particular the governance of that service provision by local governments in that respect. So I'll draw widely and extensively on the findings of that particular research project, because again, don't let me influence your thinking in any way, but a lot of the work which is published on smart cities is not grounded in research. It's just a few ideas and a few notions and a few critical insights that academics or leading practitioners have, which aren't tested, in that regard, as field work or as research projects, and therefore aren't particularly well grounded. But that's just my opinion. Obviously, when you get a major research grant, about €6 million or something like that, you have to deliver. That's a big project to deliver on. So everything has to be pretty well thought through and tested, and I say well grounded. The other project which I'll
draw upon is something called CLUE, which is climate neutral urban districts in Europe, which is now still ongoing. It's still a live project, which takes much of the insight which we gained from smart cities and tries to apply it within the energy and with the carbon and global warming, and also therefore climate change to address that particular social challenge. So if there is a convergence, then hopefully it's in that particular direction that smart cities can deliver the sustainability for them to adapt to climate change and to manage that particular process. If they can, then they are really then performing on a world-class platform, and they can be defined as being smart. But that gives away a bit of the last chapter in a way, in terms of the main finding. But see if we can get there. The funding bodies, obviously, we have to credit them because they provide us with the means by which to carry out this research. Obviously, the European Union, Interreg 4B, which is the north of the Europe, Interreg 4C, which is the whole of Europe, and also the European Investment Bank. Also asked us to look at setting up a particular fund for smart cities and communities, and obviously draw upon some findings of that as well. But in terms of the European Union, obviously it is a massive initiative. It is a really serious strategy from their point of view, their perspective. But it's built on a perspective. It's built on their vision of 2020 and 2040 and 2060 and 2080 is where they see their final horizon for this particular next research framework, I call Horizon 2020. It extends beyond 2020 and goes into 2080 in terms of its ambition. And again, it's quite common for these types of frameworks to overreach themselves, yes, in terms of their vision and in terms of their expectation, and to become, sort of unbalanced as a consequence of trying to reach too far without the stability that's required to keep everything quite, well intact and secure, I should say, for the existing system. So just because Europe has a desire to achieve this, that, and the other, doesn't mean that we shouldn't question it or be critical of it, because it is just a perspective, a possibility, rather than something that we should, based upon the evidence, try and achieve in that regard. Okay. So we should also always, we should always apply our critical faculties to these things. Okay. So there are lots of definitions going around about what a smart city is. I never really got tied up in the definitional component of smart cities, because you just end up going around in circles, or we say in the UK, chasing the tail in that regard. But there is one particular definition which has become, the working hypothesis for smart cities. Something which grounds us in the present and also, gives us some prospect as to the future. And this is from colleagues who worked in the Smart Cities project from the Free University in Amsterdam. Carrie Bloom, who's Italian, from the University of Milan, was seconded to Amsterdam at that particular period of time. But they say, Carrie Bloom et al., smart cities are realised when investments in human and social capital, traditional and modern communication infrastructure fuel sustainable economic growth and a high quality of life. Okay. By way of and through the wise management of natural resources and participatory governance this calls for. Okay. So this one's probably got the greatest number of citations, this particular definition. There is obviously quite a strong normative content, it's quite value-laden in that regard. It isn't a straight objective factual definition of what a smart city is. It is a, again, a normative statement. It has a number of very useful components in it. For example, human and social capital, it emphasises. Communication infrastructure, it emphasises. And that is somehow providing a platform for sustainable economic growth, high quality of life, through participatory governance. It seems to understand the system in which smart cities are embedded, are part of, and want to see developed in that regard. But in a particular way, by celebrating human and social capital, communication infrastructures, support economic growth, and therefore by the means of participatory governance. What I like about it in particular is it doesn't basically prioritise or over-prescribe the actual economic component of smart cities. It highlights the human and the social experiences and the communication capacities more so than the economic in that regard. Obviously, there's a tradition that economics rules and economic determines everything else. Smart cities seems like an opportunity to break free from that, to stop the economic being the driving force and to prioritise all the particular aspirations from the city and to champion them and to value them more so than the economic. Okay. So that's something that we very strongly try to develop the means by which to do and therefore make it more participatory. That makes sense to you? That particular quotation, that particular definition? Looking a bit blank. Yeah? Okay? No. You don't disagree with that as a starter for the definition of smart cities? Because there are many different perspectives. I had to review a paper maybe 2 weeks ago, came in from a journal, and it had 250 definitions of smart cities. And it was trying to analyse them all and say, which was the most appropriate, etc., etc. So it's become, a bit of a nightmare, really. In fact, I don't think we should even try. It should actually emerge from the research process and the findings, rather than try and pre-specify exactly what a smart city is. That's to have more than 2020 vision, more than anybody can be expected to have and to possess in that regard. This way, we open up to a much more multidimensional or n-dimensional or multi-perspective view of the city, and provides a space for them to actually operate. Okay. Anyway, let's see how that works later on. Okay, so this is the emergent definition which we took from that particular initial hypothesis about the smart city. We tried to, in effect, find a means to operationalise that definition. We see them as part of regional innovation systems. Okay. Innovation seems to be, the key thing, the key term about our superiors' expectations of cities. It's supposed to be innovative milieus, they're supposed to be dynamic, they're supposed to be creative, they're supposed to be vital, vibrant experiences, visceral, that way, lived out with a real intensity. But it's supposed to be changing all the time, reinventing themselves, something novel, something new. But that particular process of innovation, we found, is probably best locked in this heritage in the academic world for regional innovation systems. Urban innovation is, what's understood about it, what's known about it, is actually quite limited and quite weak relative to what work has been done in regional innovation systems. So smart city regions, I suppose, starts to become a sort of relationship to explore. So we're not looking at a city per se, for itself and in itself and for itself, but in terms of its relationship to regional innovation systems. Okay, and the embedded intelligence, which obviously comes from information theory, cybernetics, etc., intelligent applications in computing, form of engineering, etc., etc. Let's see that now. Developing services as business-to-citizen applications. Okay, so the paper that Romano showed me, I think yesterday, or he sent to me yesterday, or the day before, they said, oh, I've written a paper on smart cities. What do you think of my definition of smart cities? And reading through it, it became clear that he was making a critical distinction between intelligence and applications. His argument or thesis seems to be that smart cities are an exercise in applications. Okay? Not about building up knowledge, not about driving intelligence forward and looking at the possibilities of things, but actually deciding upon how we should intervene, acting upon that knowledge base and being innovative in developing a number of applications, which I said I couldn't agree more with. You're absolutely right. It is an example of application. That's what I feel distinguishes the drive towards smart cities relative to other concepts of cities which we've been working with in the past. So you can measure the intensity of the smart city by the number of applications we see, which doesn't help us a great deal at this point, but it does give us a sort of critical reference point to say, okay, it's about apps, it's about smartphones, it's about smart apps. That's one way of representing the smart city experience. It's about the use of information and communication technologies and programming and codes by which to communicate and participate in relationships and exchanges and all the rest via that particular medium. That's one way we could actually measure that. I think that's something meaningful there to explore. But as routine operations, ready for use by communities. Yes. So these apps can't be to expert, yeah? They can't be, in that sense, locking out the public as intermediary stages in the process of delivery. Somehow it's got to be business-to-citizen applications, citizen being the end user of the service, and therefore who it's designed for, and that doesn't become the exception. Why look at this? Isn't this new and novel and unique and singular in that regard? No, the sort of experience should be, well, that's routine. That's what we do. That's how we do it. That's because it's provided on a massive scale in that regard, ready for use by the public as members of particular communities wanting those services. If you can get to that level, that particular art of development, then you really would be a smart city there. Okay. But no doubt there are blockages or barriers or hurdles to actually go through or jump over en route to that particular end game, I would suggest. Okay. So hopefully this just makes some connections to these particular issues and obviously drawn from this particular source here. So I'll develop this. I've got Smart City in the background as part of a regional innovation system, embedding intelligence in given systems, which are legacy systems as much as future potential systems, so as to develop services on this basis and as routine operations, etc., etc. Because otherwise we won't get the energy, we won't get the water, we won't get the transport, the ICT, even the food nowadays, and the climate that we want on a day-to-day basis, without these applications becoming mainstream. I'm not just the exception to the rule, but the rule itself. Okay, and obviously just some background. The first Smart Cities project which we worked on, some of the findings were disseminated here a special issue of urban technology under the heading of creating smarter cities. And since then, we've obviously disseminated some work here, intelligent buildings. I understand most of you are civil engineers or architects, so a little bit more of a structures dimension. It has built forms within this particular special issue, which is this looking at this transition from intelligent to smart cities. And then a few books. Well, actually, what happened was that the publishers came to me and said, well, these things are selling quite well. Okay. So we'd like to put it in the form of a book. Okay. So that's what we did. In fact, these two specialists got translated into two books, which is, don't buy them because they're exactly the same as a special issue. It's just the publishing house wanted to generate more income for their point of view. I don't get anything. And obviously there we go. But this one is a new text, Smart Cities Governing, Modelling and Analysing Transition. Came out last year. And this is like a reader, yeah, as a book. It's basically captured all what I consider, and some other colleagues consider, to be the best works on smart cities, which are currently available. And gathered them together in 13, 14 chapters of this particular text. And obviously builds the various contributions together in an overall framework and line of reasoning and argument, which says, there is something bigger going on here. There is a consistency to it, there is a progression, and there is a sort of convergence point to this work, and it does lead in this particular direction, etc., etc. But at the moment, I'm trying to find a means to govern that particular transition and stabilise it as a particular transformation. And then more recently, we had an attempt to break out of Europe and our confines. A couple of years ago, America weren't interested in smart cities. Yeah, not for us. They are now. The academic community is taking the issue, but Middle East were interested in developing a sort of framework for smart cities. So we put together again a number of papers from the Middle East in May, called Development in the Gulf, Sustainable, Intelligent and Smart Cities in that regard. That's the most recent, I think, publication we've had on the subject of smart cities. Okay, so that's the material that you can access if you're so inclined to read more and find out more about smart cities from the perspective of the quote, which obviously just briefly worked through smart cities being part of a regional innovation system. And in the meantime, we got approached by the European Investment Bank to review one of their programs, yes, which was an attempt trying to promote the development of smart cities by providing cities themselves with access to certain funding mechanisms. Okay. So cities could assemble the means by which they could package a proposal for a major intervention in their city and then go to the European Bank and say, okay, this is what we're proposing to do, but we also want to draw upon one of your funding mechanisms to make that feasible as an investment project. Which meant the European Investment Bank then becoming a partner, in that particular project and a joint venture going forward to promote transport or to promote some sort of infrastructure development within the concept of smart cities. Now this was interesting enough in itself, but the European Investment Bank saw this evolution of smart cities as a way of carrying out some really quite deep, meaningful structural change within the European community itself. Okay. So smart cities isn't just about a project anymore, of providing ICT, Wi-Fi points throughout the city, giving citizens free access to that particular service, free, a quota of web space, possibly even your own account, blah blah blah. that's something that every citizen could experience in their city as an expression of smart cities. But the European Investment Bank and the European Commission are trying to leverage this concept of smart cities as a means to radically transform the way it goes about business with the rest of the nation states. Because it's trying to use smart cities as a means to shift emphasis away from financing annual budgets to support particular services, away from that, which is the European Regional Development Fund, in effect, which Italy gets billions of euros from, as does the UK, and all European cities, switching that money away and focusing it instead on investment in infrastructure. So rather than supporting revenue expenditures on services, it wanted to cut back on that allocation and reallocate that proportion of the budget in favour of capital investment. As you're probably already aware, a lot of criticism with our cities is, well, the infrastructure's old and it's decaying and it's obsolete, and therefore how can we compete with our rivals in Asia and elsewhere, China, etc., India now, if we can't get the investment into our infrastructure because we're spending far too much money supporting services. We have to switch priorities. We have to prioritise capital investment and smart cities to drive towards smart cities and their ability to perform as world-class centres of excellence in X, Y, and Z. But okay, this is how we do it. We switch money from services to capital expenditure. And we were asked to look at, what the demands of a smart city were, and they would then work out what capital investment funds could be assembled to support that. Okay. So again, you see it's a top-to-bottom issue, a lot of depth to smart cities. It doesn't matter whether you're an architect or a planner or a civil engineer or whatever. There's a whole managerial infrastructure above that, which is setting the parameters, metrics, the opportunities for interventions in the city, which obviously civil engineers and others can obviously manage in terms of executing various projects. Okay, so what does it say? Europe 2020 sets out the EU strategy for smart, sustainable and inclusive growth. If you haven't seen the European 2020 strategy, have a look at it. It prioritises smart. Okay. Everything has to be smart. And then, because it's smart, it will be sustainable. And if it's sustainable, it will be inclusive. Okay. That's their assumption anyway. But it is about growth, and going for growth. Obviously, it's written in the period of the recession, which was in the UK, just coming out of it now. And where the economy is based on knowledge and innovation, and more resource efficient, greener and economically competitive, and where there is a high employment, social and territorial cohesion, which is incredibly aspirational. The role of cohesion policy in implementing the 2020 strategy, and especially in the area of smart growth, is underlined by a number of documents, these here, blah, blah, blah. But the proposal was to act without delay, to invest more of the resources still available from the European Regional Development Fund in the present programme period on smart growth, by concentrating investment in actions supporting climate, energy and environmental issues. Okay? So, we want to promote smart, sustainable and inclusive growth. We want everybody to participate in that particular policy and take the actions forward needed to deliver on those particular expectations. But in doing so, we're going to focus on climate, energy and environmental issues. Okay. And the second paragraph here is basically the mechanisms that they have to fund capital expenditure under that particular initiative, which are these Jessica funds, which manage development, have investment plans, etc., which support public-private partnerships for this particular type of venture. Okay. So the point being that smart cities can't develop without this infrastructure. Okay. And it won't develop from the bottom up, as standalone innovations or of that kind, but need a top-down, sort of framework in which to operate as well. Okay, so this is what we looked at. 4 or 5 cities throughout Europe which define themselves as being smart, and had some status in that regard because basically they met model expectations of working with university, working with industry and government, all working together to promote and deliver a strategy which would take their city away from where they currently are, which was in a way an intelligent city, into a transition into a smart city. And these cities were Manchester, Amsterdam, Malmo and Barcelona, which we carried out some analysis for on behalf of the European Investment Bank. Now, a key thing about these cities, smart cities don't just materialise, from nowhere. They don't just suddenly appear as if like magic. It is an incredibly orchestrated process of transition and incredibly dedicated and deliberate action which is taken by these cities. It needs a very, very strong, sort of strategy to carry forward. The way you carry forward that strategy is by having a special development agency, to drive the particular initiative forward, right? To centralise in a way the ambition, the expectations, to filter the projects into programs of action, which come together because they are synergetic and build critical mass, to act as a platform for smart cities to evolve. And these particular agencies are identified here. MDDA, which is Manchester's Digital Development Agency. Amsterdam has something called Innovation Motor. Let's accelerate our innovation. Let's motor along, the highway, or super fast highway. In that regard, innovation. Malmo has something called BO01, which apparently is a postcode district which it was centering this experiment on in Malmo. And Barcelona has at District 22, which is almost the icon of innovation within urban and regional sort of studies to take their particular actions forward. Okay. So if you're interested, in promoting smart cities, then make sure that your city has got one of these special development agencies that can drive it forward. Because otherwise, we found there wouldn't be the coherence required to cut through, all the barriers which they are presented with as initiatives, and find a way forward. Okay. And what these particular cities have in common in terms of their development, special development agencies, was they were all focusing on these particular themes here. Okay. So these are some themes emerging around smart cities. Digital infrastructure, common to all cities, reviews, high-speed broadband, wireless technology, mobile services, crowdsourcing, cloud, information, Internet of Things, IoT, Internet of Things. These are all, the digital infrastructures required to support the development of smart cities. So again, infrastructural level, system-wide, city-wide initiatives there of embedding new infrastructures which will support a particular platform of activity. Obviously support the data management in terms of the information flows, of intelligence back to service providers through data collections, storage, processing, blah, 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 blah. Which is required again, obviously, as a means to support the applications, because otherwise you'll not know, what service is being provided, to what level, whether it's satisfactory, whether it meets user requirements or not. So these two are obviously very closely related or linked to one another. And then other initiatives in renewable energy, which these two components could go on their own, not necessarily connected to this one. And this is where the main division in smart cities really lies, in linking these various themes together. What they like to say, integration in that respect. Because obviously, you know, computer scientists, programmers and all the rest, and infrastructural providers and, you know, and service operators can develop quite easily along these two themes, because that's where their expertise lies. And we can completely re-engineer the city to make it, you know, digital in that regard. Doesn't necessarily transfer into renewable energy in that respect. That was going on alongside, shall we say, the other two particular themes we identified. But they all came together within these particular four locations. So, renewable energy, possibly not very novel for Italy, I'm not sure, but in the UK, these were very novel concepts to introduce. Combined heat and power, decentralized energy systems, and smart grids. Okay. Obviously, you can't have a smart grid without digital infrastructure. So, you know, the drive towards renewable energy, away from a number of singular experiments which are going on, you know, in isolated cities across Europe, if we really want to make renewable energy a fundamental core component of smart cities, it's completely dependent on this digital infrastructure. Okay. Because otherwise, you cannot make the efficiencies that are expected of your decentralized energy provision without that particular technology. Okay. Because it provides you with the means to innovate and to really deliver on key performance indicators, which we'll see the prospect of later on, and you know, some of the other slides that come from additional pieces which we've been working on. Okay, so again, that relationship is echoed in terms of dependency in obviously smart metering, efficient heating and cooling systems, low energy lighting or LED lighting, etc., within smart buildings. Okay. So hopefully these things are, you know, cumulative on the vector, rather than just additive. And obviously the infrastructure is required here. You manage the data, you've got renewable energy on smart grids, which is feeding in, then we can meter the buildings which are using that renewable energy, etc. That would be greater efficiency, and we can also introduce new lighting systems, which will again compound that.
What smart meter stands for?
Smart meters. Basically, most metering systems, as the legacy systems, yes, we're just telling you how much you consume. Yes.
How much you consume?
Yes, okay. That's right. But smart meters allow you to interact with the provider and say, okay, well, the readout is how much am I consuming in terms of my heating for water, or how much am I using for appliances, or they also bundle other services about how much water am I consuming, or how much am I using for my lighting, etc., etc. So they allow you to change your behavior. If you don't like the readout because it's peaking and you're being charged a lot,
you can communicate with the provider.
Exactly. It's a two-way circuit. Rather than just information provision, it's provision of information which allows the user to then interact and code the provision of that service based upon their priorities. So it's a really interactive exercise in that respect. You as a human would do that, yes, and decide, okay, well, let's put down on lighting measures, let's put down on water because it's too expensive. Then once you've got your Internet of Things working, and you've got the means by which to automate that particular consumption pattern. So you can say, obviously, no heating at all between such and such a time.
So they are all linked together,
yes.
Obviously.
Yes.
We cannot have smart meters without having IT or crowdsourcing. They are all linked together.
Exactly, yes. You can't have them to the degree that you would like to experience them. You can have smart meters which are just manually, controlled. That's what most of them are at the moment, because the Internet of Things isn't really operational yet. It's still being trialed in that regard. So you can have a human interface, and that is smart, because we're a two-way communication, rather than just a one-way provision system, which was supposed to work. experience. Does that make sense?
What?
Does that make sense?
Yes, of course
Yeah,
it makes
good,
sense.
good. Anybody got a smart meter in their home or residence? No? Well, your service providers, well, in the UK and Northern Europe in particular, where we consume much more energy because of the climate, you know, we are all now having smart meters installed by our service providers. Yes? There's an agreement between governments and the service providers, i.e. industry, to gain efficiencies on this basis, to be smart, and providing and renewing the old legacy systems, replacing them with these smart meters, so that we can learn as consumers about the cost of the service, not just the cost of the service, but we also have indicators on carbon emission, etc., etc. So it encourages us to be greener as well, in that regard too. So there are very subtle ways of changing our behaviour in that regard, to learn about consumption, cost, and emission rates, wastage, etc., of that particular finite resource. Okay? Yeah. Okay. And then obviously smart transport. At the moment is obviously has been a key issue for a long time. But some of the main gains and achievements are quite soft system approaches. Bike schemes, I'm not sure how them in Napoli, but in most cities you can just take a bike off a stand and then ride around the city and then just drop it at any other stand. In a lot of cities this is free. In some cities it costs €1, €2 or something like that. Theft is minimal in the north, but apparently theft in the south is quite bad. Particularly Barcelona, are very cautious about introducing one of these schemes, because when I trialled it, most of the bikes disappeared from the stands. But in the UK, theft is less than 5%, which, UK is normally thought of as being quite lawless, but it's been very sort of reassuring to get those statistics back. And obviously they are used intensively by people to stop number of trips within urban areas. Real-time bus timetables, your smart apps, you download from your bus companies that allow you to track where a bus is in real time, and therefore not just rely upon the timetable, but it's usually running out of sync. Electric vehicles, and yes, highly subsidised by states at the moment, obviously not very popular. Carpooling systems becoming more popular now, to have a pool scheme whereby you share a car, either ownership or rental, or even just actual trips themselves in that regard. And stronger emission monitoring, and obviously street lighting cuts down on the cost of safety and security with the transportation network. So again, you could go for a complete heavy re-engineering of the transportation system, which would probably be redundant by the time you agree what to do because of the changes in technology, already caught up on you. Or you can go for these quite soft interventions like this, which do make a marked difference. They are quite visual, high profile in that regard. And also they do change our behaviour. We start to see cities as something which we can take at a slower pace, more pedestrian, more walkable, etc., etc. These concepts are now, again, becoming quite powerful within regional planning in particular, and the way designers lay out their master plans and offer various mobility, provide various mobility options to the residents in that regard. And these are all very obviously high profile and in operation within these particular courses. So, you want to lobby your city, or Napoli, don't you, the commune, to say we need a special vehicle to promote smart cities, and therefore, the agenda should be this. Here's our proposal. Can we have a consultation and a set of deliberations to begin this particular strategy? Because if you don't, I can guarantee you they already are doing this, even if they're not making it public, because there is far too much funding at stake to lose out on. because the European Commission is championing these particular innovations. And it would be, well, self-defeating or counterproductive for your city to ignore that and to say that they were best, they were best for you. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so we were also with our Smart Cities project, and also with the European Investment Bank, asked to again try and work through some model by which we could standardise this approach to smart cities. The idea was, and it was just an idea for the European Commission, that okay, we've got these pioneers, we've got these champions. They're small and very few, very, very valuable. They're putting leading edge, foresight, seeing the future, setting the trend, etc., whatever metaphor is appropriate. But how do we allow everybody else access to that particular process? How do we make that the rule? What do these cities need as a set of institutions and as a set of practices by which to become smart cities? Okay. Now there are a number of models by which to approach smart cities. Yeah. This is one of them, which we developed, called the triple helix model of smart cities. And it's really the third model, I would say. Yeah, the third model? Yeah, it is the third model. The other two I'll refer to briefly later on. But this comes from a very, well, quite well established, powerful theory of the triple helix, which is about the knowledge economy and the emergence of the knowledge economy of Europe as a means by which to drive innovation in regional innovation systems. And therefore, we were trying to say, well, maybe we could draw that down to the level of a city and apply it for the development of smart cities. And essentially, that's what we've tried to do. The original argument is, well, there's intellectual capital, there's wealth creation, and there's regulatory standards which are needed, by which are means by which this system becomes self-organizing in that regard. And therefore, an exemplar of participative governance which Europe aspires to in that respect. Obviously here it's a linear deliberate process of making some connection between university, industry, and government. University obviously having the wealth of intellectual capital, to access it, by which to create wealth, which is mainly industry's job, to form a set of applications, and then government regulates that particular process of wealth creation obviously on the basis of intellectual capital, which is critical. So let's see where this goes here in terms of developing the model. So, idea about embedding the intelligence of ICT, energy and transportation related infrastructures, obviously by industry, required to meet this particular challenge. And then by way of wise management to participatory governance of business to citizen services, bundled together as user-ready applications. Okay? So it really is just taking that original definition of smart cities and finding a space or place by which to allocate the particular components of the definition in terms of roles, responsibilities, if you like, duties in that regard, of these particular institutions of our state. Okay? Because these three institutions are really, supposed to be taken up as exemplars of everything that we value within our culture, and everything therefore is expected to carry us through into the future and the next set of challenges which emerge. So somehow smart cities have got to be a relationship between those three institutions, binding new relationships into partnerships, forging ahead certain actions, etc., on a basis where everybody is consensus about what's being done, why, and how it's being done, because it meets particular standards. Okay, so then again, it's just a conceptual representation. It's obviously not operational at this particular point. Hopefully this will develop at the moment. But it is a response to two previous models of smart cities which exist currently, exist, a smart city ranking, and future internet accounts of their development. Okay. Smart city rankings, if you look at that, say that's the Giffinger legacy, the first project that was funded by the European Commission on smart cities, basically ranks cities against each other and has a performance index based upon that, where they stand in that particular ranking, which then defines them as being smart or less smart or not particularly smart, etc., etc. So it's really comparative and based upon economic competition and social cohesion in that regard. The other one is about, okay, we're going to develop all this technology to drive the future city forward, and that's the future internet approach to smart cities. And in fact, they see the smart city absolutely determined by the rate of pace and development of the future internet. The future internet is basically the internet of things. So it's not the internet of people, it's not the internet of places, it then becomes an internet of things. And everything that exists in this universe will be tagged and monitored and analysed by the internet. Yes, in that regard. So every bit of intelligence which is perceivably available in our universe can be transferred into code and transmitted, across various networks to form the intelligence and knowledge base of specific actions. Which is a bit like cyberspace, cyborg image of the future. Which obviously the triple helix is less futuristic in that respect. The triple helix is about legacy systems being transformed into the expectations, and to meet the expectations of the future. So it deals with the now as much as the future, and the future is the here and present as much as the future, and therefore the legacy of the past as much as the future. Whereas the other two models are a little bit vague on those. They're always looking ahead and forging ahead with the next generation of activities, which is good and fair, and no criticism of that at all. The question is, how do you take your legacy with you? How do you take everybody else on that journey? How do you hold hands, and walk together down that particular path or route? That way, you have to build the capacity to do that. It doesn't just emerge from nowhere, as if by magic or manna from heaven, as another phrase would be. You need the science and the technology. You need the infrastructures to support industry, create wealth from that particular process. And you need to regulate the standards by which that proceeds. Otherwise, you'll have total chaos, of nothing more than counterproductive competition between a very weak and uncoordinated set of service providers. Okay. So that's why that obviously, personally, obviously committed to the prospect of the triple helix model. Europe has, but it won't, it won't ever say that. But when you get contracts from the European Commission to carry out certain programs, we would like you to try and, we'd like you to try and promote this through sort of triple helix model. It's all off, off agenda thing. But they do informally support this triple helix model. Because it is more of a management system in that regard, rather than a set of applications or technologies. Okay, so the smart city rankings probably sits around about here at present. And Internet of Things, oh yes, future internet, sorry, probably sits around here. So they provide you with certain critical points or intersections within these relationships, notes, but not the trajectory of the development. Okay, they don't link these things together in any particular way, or even project them beyond what boundaries they set. And the big question that's left out of both those alternatives is the governance issue. I prefer the column. Okay, so this is what we try to operationalize under under our Smart Cities project. The institutions here, university, industry, government, yes, serving particular functions, which are down here at the bottom, social, cultural, environmental, but also driving intellectual capital wealth creation and regulatory standards for them. So what we've done here is obviously the cross-sectional relationship, which is always a doomsday scenario where everything fails because you try to be too clever about the nature of relationships between these particular objects which you're analysing. But hey, you know, why not repeat history and run the risk of failing in that regard? So rather than having a linear relationship, which obviously we had before, here we've got this relationship in terms of 45-degree angle efficiency frontier concept, or efficiency curve, in terms of relationship between the various institutional components of this emerging triple helix. Yeah. And in terms of university, we found that smart cities, the intellectual capital was, you know, the bedrock, or cornerstone, whatever, the foundation. Got to touch a sensitive there. And it's about building capacity for embedding the intelligence in these infrastructures, etc. And universities are helping with that, not just in terms of science and technological innovations or inventions themselves to do with the internet or the Internet of Things or whatever other digital infrastructures are emerging from this, you know, particular line of research, but also by embedding, by reaching out to society and involving them in this particular revolution as well. Okay. So giving it a human and a social interface in that regard, as specified in the opening quotes, and building the capacity for society to make use of those particular technologies in that regard. In research sort of logic or method, this level here is very high. There's nothing in this level, as you can see. It's empty in space, but we don't know anything. There's something in it, of these images at the back, or what we don't know or understand at the moment. We can't give a name to. That's fundamental research, yes. Smart Cities doesn't rely upon fundamental research. Doesn't even rely upon applied research. It relies on something called third mission research, which is outreach, which is saying, okay, well, we've got all these technologies, we've got all this science and technology, we've got all these innovations. We need to find an application, you know, to give them an outlet, to, you know, give them an opportunity to take root, to grow, to build, to develop capacity, etc., etc. We've been trying to empower industry to do that for a long, long time, and it isn't working. Okay? It isn't taking off. It isn't being successful. So let's go directly to society. Let's bypass industry in this instance and go directly to society and say, okay, well, let's build your capacity to use these particular technologies and apply them in everyday service provision, etc., etc. So let's take that particular route, and therefore we build your knowledge of these particular applications so that industry can respond in time, and you can co-design the service provision with industry to make sure that it meets your particular user requirements. And this is, again, what most innovation theories see as the future, process of co-design. Rather than industry saying, okay, well, we know what you need, we will second guess your requirements and, you know, expectations and deliver you this, and you'll find it, you know, perfectly acceptable. That's far too risky nowadays for industry to invest in major applications on that basis. They want a lot more safety and security. They want a lot more, you know, a lot less risk involved, a lot more stability. So they're going to society, you know, with crowdsourcing and all the rest of it, and say, okay, let's co-design these particular services together, so that both of us can be assured that what we actually deliver will meet your expectations. Okay, and that's done again customization of these particular services to meet cultural requirements of the users, and that's done through opening new channels of access to information and knowledge, etc., etc. And then those co-design services can create wealth, yes, from the application, and then obviously the government can monitor and evaluate those particular service applications in relationship to the user profile, which is consuming that particular service in that regard. So all these particular components are what's required for the smart city to be self-organizing. We need to shift from a basic process of customization to a multi-channel provision of information and data information, to specific user profiles, to the specific demographic, if you like, of your service provider. And we can only do that by society building capacity to co-design services. This is why, we're all asked nowadays by governments to participate in particular exercises and to express our views and opinions on what's being proposed, etc., etc. That is a loose process of co-design. Whereas before, they didn't talk to us, obviously. They just did what they wanted to do as a monopoly provider and say, take it or leave it. That model's dead now. Well, it should be dead and buried. It's dead, it's not been buried. But it should be dead and buried. We, as members of society, should be just as powerful, if not more powerful, as members of the public, as the actual industry providing the service. And we should be asked to co-design that particular service in conjunction with them. Only that way will, obviously, the resource base be efficient and performance be of the caliber which is expected. Okay? And obviously, the government ultimately takes responsibility for monitoring and evaluating that particular process. So, in this representation of smart cities, it's these three cells which are aligned, yes, or prioritised in that regard. This is the possibility of an efficiency frontier emerging for innovation and for a stepwise logic to surface in the actual development of smart cities. If you go to smart city ranking, there's no capacity building, there's no co-design. There's a monitoring and evaluation because you want to see what cities are, how they're performing, so you have to monitor and evaluate. But you've got no idea of how cities get to that state. Yes. You just measure in the headlines. This is what's beneath the headlines, sort of thing, to understand the process by which those particular states of being or existence actually emerge, and the standards which they set. Okay. So hopefully this will be a bit more helpful in saying, well, let's open this box and see what's required to build capacity, and then go on and co-design, etc. Okay, and if this works well, let's see what it did here. This is, in effect, an idea of what is happening, was happening 5 years ago. Smart Planets, IBM, yeah. That was their initiative about 5 years ago. They were working in this particular area. It's very much an industrial application area. Smart government was Microsoft, had a major initiative on smart government for cities. And smart communities, Cisco's particular representation of this development process. Again, consensus not just with the universities about how to proceed, but obviously with industry in terms of some of the major, obviously, transnational companies or corporations which are responsible for driving our cities forward in terms of experiences, particularly to do with work and leisure, all the rest of it, linked to trials going on in Manchester, at that time Edinburgh and Amsterdam. My own hometown or home city of Edinburgh was actually the first to define itself as smart. Yes. About, could be more than 10 years ago now, maybe 15 years ago. It had a number of initiatives, and then there was some problem to do with transition from this section to this section, which made it lose momentum. Yes, it got stuck or bogged down in a particular process of the transformation. How do we transfer it to capital and wealth, etc., which allowed other cities to basically become much more closely associated with this particular development process. Okay, so that's not universities driving it, is it? That's industry, yes, and other cities. That was our so it was a 2-day conference here. That was the first day, getting their experiences of this process. I open innovation systems for the governance of smart cities. Okay. This is one of the other key themes, which is new and novel, which is revolutionary, yes, in its significance. That systems by which we develop a smart city should no longer be proprietary. Yeah. The actual code or programming logic is agreed by all these providers. Should no longer be private. Should no longer be the exclusive intellectual property or technical of those corporations, but should be shared as the Creative Commons effect, so that these applications can accelerate beyond legal disputes. Edinburgh is a prime example of getting tied up in a proprietary problem to do with this code and to do with programming of the particular smart city platform. It resulted in a legal dispute which took 3 years to resolve, compensation, etc., over a dispute regarding who owns the intellectual property for this particular code. Therefore, an issue to do with intellectual capital there. Open innovation systems say, okay, well, we have a Creative Commons, we share ownership of this particular code, we can transfer it across corporations, it becomes the SCORM, the standard protocol by which to develop the applications. And therefore, we don't get into legal disputes about who owns what, and therefore, who can extract money from this, that, and the other. We're doing it on the basis of accelerating innovation and developing improved services which can meet the expectations of society, not commerce and trade in that regard. I mean, proprietary interests in that respect. Okay, so open innovation systems are fundamental to progress, which will be made or lost in this particular smart city venture. Okay. And the means by which to obviously accelerate the development of open innovation systems for the governance of smart cities, it was agreed with all these major providers, would be the strategic model, regional innovation systems, through customization of services, business process mapping, the enterprise architecture to support that, co-design services, to give user profiles, and to support specific applications. Okay. And there was, 30 such applications developed under the Smart Cities project, from as wide as a customer service center, basically processing calls, automating the calls for demands on services placed upon a local authority, and executing actions based upon that particular information which came in, to your smart applications in terms of real-time transportation networks. Some of the software code, which is now generic across all cities, was designed, within this particular project, and then was, diffused across infinite number of platforms because it's on an open source basis. There were no legal disputes about who should get compensation or revenue or whatever from the provision of that particular application. There's only concern is, well, how much or if anything that they pay for the service itself, i.e. the product, not the middleware which is required to deliver that particular software to the end user. So whatever, I would suggest that whatever major advances have been made, particularly in terms of wireless connectivity and wireless services and use of smart apps and phones, comes from this particular innovation million here between industry and government to do with open innovation systems which are provided for the distribution of services en masse within cities. Okay, so it's nice to know sometimes that something's happening different, isn't it? And this second day translated into the open transformative government of smart cities and their communities. So what do we mean by transformative government? Well, what we mean is highly deliberative or directly participative, and more than just representative democracy, more than just voting, once every 5 years or whatever it is, to decide upon what we want and who we want and how we want it. But this will be a constant, everyday process through, in effect, concepts of democracy. Being able to use our communication infrastructures to vote on things, not randomly or in an ad hoc way, out with the political regime, some sort of civic option or alternative, but to be part of, integrated into that strategic structure of governance, but in a much more participatory and direct manner, directly empowering members of the public to express their views and opinions, etc., on sort of services they would consider to have a positive effect on their quality of life. Okay. And since then, obviously, Barcelona and Malmo have come into this particular framework, and open innovation systems, governments of smart cities, in line with energy consumption, carbon emission targets, set by the EU as part of a climate change adaptation strategy. So again, another useful dimension of this model is it's expansive, yes. It is progressive. It is flexible because it's open, enough to find spaces by which to absorb new priorities. Only since 2001, 2002 has the energy consumption, carbon emission and policy become equally, if not more important, than the ICT and digital infrastructure policy, which is obviously the backbone to what we would do here. But given that infrastructure is in place, now it can absorb applications in things as diverse as energy and carbon emissions and climate change, as well as transport, as well as buildings and others. You'll see these things as naturally related to one another, because your mind and the way you're conceptualizing these relationships is quite straightforward and direct. But given the legacy of private systems that are embedded within cities, that usually isn't, that in the past has not been possible to translate into action. There's always been some excuse for not being able to do this, some reason for not being able to do that, and it's through vested interests in the past legacy, which have frustrated many developments in the past. This model is supposed to be quite liberating, quite free, open in that regard, allowing society to decide and determine what future it wants to take. Okay, obviously energy saving and carbon emission issues, translated open transformative government of smart cities as a platform for regional specialisation, which is another one of the key buzzwords now of the European Commission. They have a platform for regional specialisation, whereby your city is no longer seen as a standalone state, completely firewalled from the rest of the universe. It's now supposed to be seamlessly integrated into the rest of the universe, and as a point of reference for the external world as much as the internal world. So it turns the whole concept of the city inside out and breaks down the barrier between internal and external relationships in that way. Again, that's just accurate. Okay, so is this any use? Some people say that's quite challenging, it's quite demanding, which I fully appreciate and sympathise with. But we were just trying to document and capture and share what our experiences were in that respect. And therefore it's up to others to say whether they find it useful or otherwise. But we found it useful. extremely useful, obviously, to drive us forward. But the proof is in the pudding, isn't it? I said, well, what did it produce as a set of outcomes? Because obviously you can have a conceptual model and you can understand everything, but that doesn't mean that you know how to apply that understanding and deliver on a set of expectations, and therefore meet, all the objectives which are set for a smart city. In terms of university, is there something in there for them to get out of this particular set of developments? Well, obviously, there were all these outcomes, and within a 3-year time frame, that's a hell of a lot of outcomes. There are 2 scientific reports for the European Commission as well, on top of that, and we also developed a Smart City Performance Index, okay, which we haven't publicised yet, because, again, we got retracted in negotiations with service providers to try and agree the format for that to take, and that hasn't progressed very well. And there is still a great desire to have such a performance index, one which supersedes the previous indexes which we referred to, and captures something essential, I suppose, about smart city performance. So the universities could go away with that, so they legitimate their involvement in terms of what intellectual capital they gain from the project. The industry got 35 e-service development pilots across the North Sea, so developed 35 pilot services. How do we do that? Obviously by open source software development, and by transferring those services, services that are provided in, which are developed in Edinburgh, could then be transferred into Groningen, could then be transferred into where is it? Bremen in Germany, and then Karlsruhe in Sweden. So, they didn't have to develop their own services. They could just take the code and then input the data and use that particular program by which to deliver the same service, obviously at no cost, other than processing the data and information. So you can skip the actual innovation process because it's already been codified elsewhere. And therefore cities can share the same platform for service delivery rather than have their own standalone provision. And that, well, according to Microsoft, that was the concept behind the cloud, in effect, where you're just buying certain requirements rather than having to pay for the infrastructure, which supports the delivery of that particular service. Okay. They got obviously the research briefs. We had 4 articles: Times, Guardian, Telegraph, FT, BBC, etc. We also developed the Wikipedia page on smart cities, which I think has had about 1 million hits so far. And I can't believe this, to be honest. This is absolutely, I find this absolutely incredible. Nobody has modified the Smart Cities Wikipedia page yet. And it's been in existence 4 years now. I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, to be honest. But it's had 1 million hits. And you think that somebody would have come in and put some new interpretation on it, on that. So it either says that, that's okay, and everybody's happy with it, which I find impossible to believe, or none of these great proprietary interests are willing to, go to the effort of reworking or adding to or complementing the actual original statements which were made about smart cities. Okay? So Wikipedia isn't as, sort of dynamic a particular web space or library or encyclopedia that the public would need to read at times. That's my opinion. Okay, and it's quite annoying when people just, copy that and paste it and put it into their papers without even referencing Wikipedia. And you see it there in front of you in terms of journal articles. And government. Transnational list of shared service standards for government, integration of these standards onto a European service development toolkit. European governments in particular want transnational standards. They want obviously greater integration between the nation states. They want us to be multicultural, etc., etc. They want the same standard of division to be in Sweden as it is in the UK, as it is in France, as it is in Germany, etc., etc. And obviously, we develop these particular codes and European Service Development Toolkit by which to register that transnational standard, to represent it so that people know what the expectations of that particular services are. And obviously these 35 service development pilots were developed to that particular standard and integrated into the European electronic European service development toolkit in that respect. So they share the same ontology and code and programming, and it can be lifted by any city and deployed within their particular bundle of services which they offer the public. Okay, so that's pretty successful, say, for a 3-year research and technical development project. A lot of projects I worked on have been a lot less successful, not as successful as that. Any influence of that project on the 2020 goals? Well, this is what came out when we were doing the project from Europe, that way. This is the 2020 statement about where Europe wants to be, its horizon. A.6 Smart Growth means this, sustainable growth means that, inclusive growth means that, etc., etc. That's what Europe wants development of cities to follow, to deliver on these particular policy expectations, etc., etc. And let's see, well, you could actually quite easily say, okay, this is the university component, this is the industry component, this is the government component, etc., etc. All the different units. That would be a bit crude and rough and ready, of course, but you could quite easily try to make that particular argument. I wouldn't go that far, it's a little bit more complicated than that. But yes, the one that the particular model doesn't meet is that particular box there, and go back to it, yes. Because we didn't predicate our model on it being delivered below carbon economy. Okay. Our model was predicated upon information society, yes, and equal access to data and information, open sourcing of that, big government, open government concepts, as they're now referred to as anyway. And therefore the economic issue wasn't as prioritised. It was only after we started the project that the environment came back on the agenda, and therefore, environmental sustainability and low carbon economies, which delivered really environmental sustainability, not clear any other means, became particularly important. We've had to loop that back in to the model as it's emerged. But again, that's one of the strengths of the model, that it can still come with these developments, ad hoc and in situ developments are en route, rather than having to master them at a grand scale at the very beginning. That's because of what we understand. Okay, so okay, so just let's take that and leave that in the background, yes, and see what we can map at present. Some emerging themes about smart, sustainable, inclusive growth. Smart urbanism, planning is coming again to the fore. Okay, well, this smart cities theme seems to be making a lot of headway, attracting a lot of attention, becoming very popular within the academic community. So planners are now saying, oh, well, maybe we better respond in kind and start thinking about the possibility of smart urbanism or a smart planning strategy, etc., etc., which can build upon those digital innovations and start to create capacity and move our cities forward with the requisite infrastructures to become self-organising. So you'll find a few articles, and then we have a Smart Citizen Community Programme, yes, which is very heavily funded in Europe, which is centred along these particular themes here in this background of smart growth. And then we have regional governance and territorial cohesion in that regard. So this is like, well, universities are working on this, industry is now working around here, and government is focusing on these particular issues, i.e. plans, programs, and strategies by which to govern this particular process. Smart urban infrastructure becomes a key issue. I dedicated on digital platforms. Extension in road retrofit projects are becoming, the reference points for these infrastructures. Urban extensions are still required because cities are still growing, and we haven't all got the space to accommodate that growth. Small infill developments, and within the city boundaries, we have to spill out outside the original boundaries and extend the city. Or when we can infill, and obviously, we look at possibilities of retrofitting so that we recycling spaces within the given boundaries and we reduce the footprints and all the rest of it. So certain projects or major project developments are emerging to support this relationship between smart growth and sustainable growth. And that's really where you see this idea of smart and sustainable cities beginning to emerge. Let's make a connection between what expectations of what smart cities are with what our previous expectations of the sustainable city were. Yes. It's almost like, well, let's use smart as a means to fill the gap in what sustainable cities didn't deliver or failed to deliver in that respect. And therefore you've got a number of bridge builders, that way, or people who try and unify issues which are quite divided under the concept of smart and sustainable. And then smart specialism platforms. Okay, your city has a certain function in the world. Its complexion, its identity is fixed around those particular specialisms. We don't want every city to be homogeneous. We don't want them all to be the same. Digital infrastructure can obviously, depersonalize everything and turn everything into a amorphous mass of just code and information and data. We don't want that to happen. We want people to remain people. We want communities to remain communities. We want cultures to remain cultural, etc. So there will be specialisms, but that will be for government and industry and university to work out what that particular specialism platform is. And that means, it's not business as usual, you're saying there. It's not just picking the winners. You are the growth providers of the future. It's about using this specialist platform to underpin everything. The legacy and the future of the city that way. And therefore to try and keep a strong relationship between all of them. And main funding mechanisms were the Framework 7 and the European Regional Development Fund, and there's Jessica funding which we work with the Napier Investment Bank. So we have a centre of gravity which is around sustainable growth at the moment. Rather than necessarily forging out each of these one or two extremes of the structure. Manchester, Amsterdam, Malmo, and it should be Barcelona are the cornerstones or the reference points or the exemplars of this particular relationship between sustainable growth and inclusive growth in that regard, trying to be socially cohesive. And then this process of research and innovation supported Horizon 2020 via this particular new set of initiatives here, which we'll talk about after the operate, which are hopefully they will come. Rollback, Germany, Kirchenfeld, Germany, Bronsberg, Germany, Royal Seaport, which is in Stockholm, Hammarby, which is also in Stockholm, Eaton City, which is in Germany, and also Hackbridge, which is in London. These are developments which are projects in smart urbanism, which are also connecting smart growth with sustainable growth. This is where sort of smart and sustainable city development is currently focused, I would say. A number of more recent initiatives, which are very much here and now, and in the planning stage, are this Hamburg, Vienna, Turin, Rome, and Barcelona again initiatives which are going on. Okay, so this is a sort of plotting, mapping, positioning of various initiatives which are taking place. Obviously, there was this diagonal relationship emerging. Its core centre now is around smart cities and sustainable communities. Based upon the experiences of these core major cities or metropolitan centres, you've got other satellite developments going on, which are, creating greater cohesion with the delivery of this smart, sustainable, and inclusive growth strategy. The point being that smart, sustainable, inclusive growth strategies aren't really being driven by member states. Yeah. Again, this is one of the main changes which is taking place. The European Commission is actually almost bypassing the nation states and saying cities are the means by which to deliver this future. Yeah. Cities are the new powerhouses. Cities are the new innovation centres, dynamic, hubs of development and change, who will support the future in a more immediate and direct, anyway, successful manner than the nation states will in that regard. Europe's always suggested we don't trust the nation states to do it. We want to actually support the cities because they've got a more immediate and direct contact with the public, to the citizens, into their needs and requirements, etc., etc. Okay. And the cities are, as the major drivers. Many people predict that there'll be 10 megacities which dominate the rest of the world, in the next 15 or 20 years. And nation states will be almost insignificant. The GDP of those cities alone will be greater than the nation states. And therefore, the power base is shifting from the nation states, breakdown of the nation state, to the city state. In that regard. And maybe this is an expression of that and what significance Europe sees in that particular process. But again, the point is that all cities can be innovative and find some initiative which will drive forward and be able to access funds which are available to support those actions from Horizon 2020 or whatever means there are from the European Investment Plan. As long as there's a process of innovation and there's some novelty, something new, it's not a repetition of the same old thing stuck in inertia of the legacy, but it's breaking free from that and finding a new route or path forward for the delivery of services to the public. Okay. I don't think anything more than that. No. Okay. So I think we should have a break now, shouldn't we? Yes? Good. I'm glad you agree. So, what do you want? 20 minutes? Is that okay? Is there can you go for a coffee here somewhere? Yeah? I follow. One level. So I was taken miles away to get a coffee, so I apologise for being a bit late. You said it was one floor down, but they took me about 5 blocks somewhere else in the city. I'm not sure why, but anyway, it's very nice coffee. But I'll try and, if I speak louder, I think was the message I got back. So if the tone drops a bit, then just, prompt me to speak up, please. I can't hear you at the back, etc. Okay. So just moving on then to try and develop, again, an underlying theme of that initial quotation as to smart cities, and what's developed in the interim around this idea of smart cities and communities. Because this is where I think most of the issues and expectations of smart cities will be met, through this particular programme, which Europe has funded. And I would imagine if you are working for industry or government or even universities on this particular initiative, a lot of the funding to support that activity will be through this Smart Cities and Communities programme. So again, if you haven't seen this from Europe, do check it out on the web. It does have a set of specific expectations to be met. And these developments, which we just highlighted very briefly in the previous mapping exercise, are what we really want to look at in a little more detail over the next 30 minutes or so, for this particular session. Because this is where the planning is starting to emerge to support the development of smart and sustainable cities, and these are emerging as smart urban plans for the sustainable development of city districts, areas of cities, key areas of cities, big enough to carry the infrastructure innovation to support the digital technology, and then roll out all the other particular themes as various applications to do with this action. Okay, I have bottom up applications in energy saving, carbon reduction measures, co-design in line with environmental targets set by the EC for adaptation to climate change. Okay, so really try and get cities to be really smart, or very smart, and tackle real society challenges such as big as climate change, which is obviously a global challenge, and it's most extensive. But obviously intervene in that particular challenge through the city, and the city then being a sufficient scale of intervention to make a difference. For the intervention not just be symbolic, imaginary in terms of its effect, but real in terms of the effect it has. Which you would probably assume to be the case anyway, but isn't normally the case. A model of participatory governance comes from this, that's socially inclusive in terms of design-led logic, user-centric customization, which the adaptation strategy rests on. So again, it's obviously an evidence-based or demonstration of those particular ideas, which we've surfacing in previous PowerPoints to do with the triple unit, etc. And as, say, a platform of business services bundled together to suit this particular, or meet this particular expectation. So that particular, syntax or rhetoric, which is embodied in those PowerPoints, those points there, and bullet points, I should say, there, is really a way of reconciling the logic, stepwise logic of the triple unit model into this Smart Cities and Communities program, and therefore try and get you to deliver on those particular expectations. Okay, and therefore, these are the emerging smart urban plans. Okay, if anybody says, okay, master plans are dead, long may they rest, peaceful rest, whatever. The future is with smart urban plans. In that regard, then hopefully what we'll see is examples which follow this slide, are demonstrations of those that type of planning, so-called smart urban plans. Okay, and these smart urban plans sustain developed city districts, highlight the necessity for all policymakers to act without delay, to invest more in resources still available, and support actions in climate, energy, and environmental issues. Again, just reflecting back upon what has previously been said and trying to just punctuate that message with a number of clearer demonstrations, which hopefully will follow. Okay, so here are some of the early adopters of smart urban plans for sustainable development of city districts. Obviously, just highlighted here the Google map, which I mentioned previously, Boban, Reisenfeld and Freiburg, Kirchenfield, Hammerby, Heaven City, which should be Bronsberg, Royal Seaport, and Hathridge in London. Obviously quite dispersed across Europe. Germany is probably the centre of gravity for these particular smart plans, but obviously more dispersed in terms of the north and also in terms of the UK. Do they have anything in common? What type of action are they in terms of urban plans? Well, quite a lot of extensions, as you can see, quite a lot of infills, and one of them is going against the trend and being a urban retrofit. So these are urban extensions and new settlements, yes, which have been added to the city. Are they the same size? Well, you see they're not really. How many homes are dividing? Again, different amounts. Population projections for these new settlements between 15 and 20 to 25,000 people, which isn't a great deal, obviously. We want cities to keep growing and not, sort of move people out into the suburbs, but contain the core centre of cities. Then we probably need a bigger, a growth rate than that projection there. But that's another issue. Again, this area's difference in area size and particular number of homes, etc., and population as well. So we can go from 7,500 to up to 25,000 in terms of the expectations. So they're not particularly homogeneous, they're not being, planned to any fixed standards, as you can see. They all are bottom-up voluntary measures to meet the particular circumstances of their cities and their particular growth strategies, etc., etc. So there's no top-down, the point being, there's no top-down standards being superimposed upon these early adopters. These are all quite, sort of free, evolving from the bottom up to meet the particularly local requirements. Okay? So there's no master planner out there that goes and says, well, here's the, here's the code. Just follow this code, and everything will fall into place. These are all quite, novel and new, and their innovation lies in the fact that they are quite distinctive in that respect. Just to give some expression to this, obviously, Solar City, in terms of broadband, Kirchenfeld, high density, mixed use, compact, modern, this style. Hammerby, again, is very high density, mixed use, high quality environment, quite stunning visual landscape. But again, mixed use and mixed social tenure in terms of middle class, upper class, working class inhabitants, etc., etc. Bronsberg, Royal Seaport is the area of Stockholm which is currently under development. Haven City, again, high density, reinvention of Hamburg as a industrial centre, particularly for financial services and political service provision, and also Hammerby here. This one is Hackbridge with its concept of a low carbon zone for the city, as a demonstrator there. So really just indicate these things are real, and tangible, and some of them are quite well developed, that were tested and tried out, and really quite successful neighbourhood communities in that respect, as living spaces, and also areas by which to work. Okay, so what's the results of these early adopters? Yes, in terms of their improvements in terms of energy performance and carbon emissions, etc., etc. Quite good. Yeah, the message in terms of headline. If you look at them against EU emission targets for 2030, 2040, etc., etc. And this is obviously, 2014. Remember, 2030 says we should have a saving of 40% in terms of carbon emissions alone. Obviously, way above that in terms of most of them on the 60% line. And obviously, the World Seaport suggests that it will be carbon neutral in that sense. There will be zero carbon emissions from the development of the World Seaport. From this particular line here, obviously being 100. And Hackbridge in London comes quite low down into this point here, 40%. But that's because it isn't a comprehensive development program at present. Well, in this representation here, it is limited to a retrofit of existing buildings, rather than all the others stand apart because they're either urban extensions or urban infills. And therefore they're new buildings. Yeah. All the others are new buildings, whereas this one is just a refurbishment or retrofit of the existing building. So the idea is obviously you can get as much as 40% or 45% saving on existing buildings alone, which have previously been ignored because of the tendency to focus on new exclusively. Okay, so they are quite exciting, sort of outcomes if these particular programs of, urban renewal or regeneration actually evolve in the way anticipated. Some of these programs are complete, like Canopy and Vauban and Kreuzberg. The Royal Seaport is in a more inception, more planning stage, and also Hackbridge again is evolving as something greater than just a mass retrofit program in that regard. But in terms of the EU emission targets, they all look very good in that respect. So we're consuming less energy per unit of input, and as a consequence, we're obviously emitting less carbon into the environment and contributing less to global warming, and therefore stabilising the climate in terms of change into a tolerable level of the pre-1990 state of plus or minus 2% in terms of climate change as a consequence of those projections there. So they can stand proud or be very successful standard bearers of environmental sustainability in that regard. And that's what obviously we've been designed to achieve. Okay? So again, it should be given all that credit that they deserve. And what do they do? They provide smart dividends for sustainable city districts. Yes? Talk that better. Thank you. Communities with emerging post-carbon economies. This Royal Seaport here example is obviously a decentralised energy system, the one that we picked up in the previous study for the European Investment Bank. Its energy sources will be managed based on smart grid lab here. Smart grid being laid down as infrastructure. This smart grid will be run by digital technology. In that regard, it will obviously conserve energy, which is generated from various sources, renewable and non-renewable, but it will get that particular balance. It will provide the means by which to store that energy as surplus, which has previously not been possible in any meaningful way. It's just been wasted in the system that has been there and not consumed. And also, because it can store energy, it can then manage peak loading demands on the existing system and distribute that particular load efficiently so that the Internet of Things can come in and it can use electrical appliances when the cost of energy provision is actually low. Yeah. So again, it can balance out the cost it introduces a new marginal costing regime for pricing of energy. So again, if you have battery storage in your home, which is the anticipated possibility for rural seaport, then you can store excess energy, and you can either sell it back to the grid and get compensated for that, which wasn't possible 10 years ago, because we didn't have a decentralized energy system. Or alternatively, you can use it, later on in the day or the week or whatever, because it's at free cost in that regard to you. So you can manage peak demand, and you can also therefore bring down the cost, and you can stop overloading the system, which has been a problem which most energy suppliers have had in the past, in trying to actually try and service the demands in a way which provides for stability and security within the system. It's anticipated a lot of cost of the energy which we could consume is to do with crisis management, really, and the necessity of servicing that particular surge in energy demand when it's required, rather than having slack or redundancy in the system that can automatically feed in and meet that particular spike or peak in demand. So we call it demand-led system, peak management, loading capacity in that regard. And obviously very attractive in terms of feed-ins from all various sources, renewable and non-renewable. That's the only way that they can get this extra dividend between 60% or 65% and 100%. But that don't let me overstate the case. That's still very experimental. Yeah. And the software that's required to trial those particular demonstrations is still yet to be tested out. It's still just a theoretical possibility. But the prospect of a carbon neutral settlement is there, sort of thing. It's not just an idea or an image or an imagining of somebody, and therefore, a desire to see that sort of develop. But it is now a technical possibility, which hopefully should be explored with all due rigor in that aspect. Okay, that seemed like a major innovation coming through. That's sort of the real sort of expression of what is smart about these new innovations being applied within these extensions or infills or retrofit programs. Any idea what carbon savings have to be to stabilise the system in Europe, to stop Europe being a net contributor to climate change, and therefore, neutralising its particular impact? Do you have any idea what level of carbon emission savings have to be achieved based on current levels?
40%. 40%.
Let's start with that, yeah?
Yeah.
Any advances on 40%? No, you don't know. I'm not criticising anybody. I just want to know whether this is common knowledge, or it's not. Well, it's projected that if we are to stabilise the system in Europe and not be a net contributor to global warming and therefore climate change, and all the instability that will cause with our planning regime, strategies and all that, we need to achieve 80% savings on our current, 80% savings on our current emission levels. Yeah. That's pretty terrifying, isn't it? Absolutely terrifying. That's the challenge which Europe's laid down for the engineers, and the environmentalists, and in effect, the physicists and the chemists and the biologists to try and resolve. That's your generation's challenge, really. My generation's challenge was digital infrastructure and the digitization of information, from atoms to bits, in effect, the virtualization of service provision, decarbonisation that way. Yours is far more material, that particular dematerialization process, in the fact that we want the same standard of living, but by emitting 80% less carbon into the environment. So the resetting of the system is far more excessive, far more extensive, far more deep-reaching than any challenge I was set. Okay? So I sympathise yeah, because it's going to be a heavy weight on your shoulders, okay, to try and bear, you know, in that regard. You're going to have to be Olympian, you know, in that respect, to achieve that. But that's the level of expectation. And that's one of the reasons why there is so much interest in this smart growth theme or column, because Europe knows that if we crack the code for that, yes, and we invent that particular solution, then that will go viral across the whole of the globe, you know, and Europe will be known as the centre of excellence for managing climate change. The thing that Europe likes is that America doesn't care about this at all, is not interested in this in any way whatsoever, and therefore isn't investing any of its intellectual capital in that particular innovation. So while they sleep on this particular issue, we can work hard, you know, and then try and get our due returns by selling that solution back to them, you know, as a you know, sort of plug and play, you know, application in that regard. That's the sort of, you know, meta logic, shall we say, or a caricature or comic representation of what's going on at the moment. But there's more than a grain of truth in that particular representation. I mean, China are doing more than America at the moment to try and tackle climate change. If you look through your, you know, civil engineering or architectural journals or urban journals, you'll see more contributions from Chinese academics on tackling climate change, because it is quite acute over there. You know, the smog and the emission levels are so dense that it is having a real effect on not just their quality of life, but everyday mobility, you know, in terms of going, you know, work, home, leisure, play, etc., etc. It's curtailing all those expectations. So they have, you know, obviously experienced this problem in quite an acute way. Okay, but technically it should be possible. And obviously now concepts about carbon neutrality or zero carbon city districts or zero carbon buildings, etc., have become quite commonplace. Okay. Sorry.
What are the manuals for calculating the CO2 reduction?
Yes.
If a city can in the future zero CO2 emissions,
yes.
maybe they have to both smart meters, but
yes.
They need to be produced.
Yes.
So CO2 is involved in the
yes.
production.
No, you're absolutely right. The protocols for calculating the neutrality or otherwise, yes, of emission relative to consumption is still being debated, yes. There are 4 or 5 different protocols at the moment which are competing for authority, you know, that way. The difference between the protocols is some are top-down, written by engineers, you know, in a very technically specified and restrictive way about scoping certain types of input transformation activities, output measurements, etc., and having scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, scope 4, so that then you capture everything which is processed within your city. Okay, which is a difficult thing to do. You know, it's never, that inventory has never existed before. So actually, to codify that and be able to put it into practice, apply it, put it into practice, is no, you know, simple thing to do. Okay, if you want to, the leading exponents of that particular application at the moment are the road seaports development and also Packridge in terms of the urban retrofit. There are 2 different models. One's top-down, which is climate change, CCI, climate change innovation, yes. And it's the C40 cities which have signed up to this. 40 top, you know, self-declaring leading cities in the world have all agreed to tackle climate change and to sponsor the development of this protocol by which it then monitors and evaluates that particular transformation process. The other is something called One Planet Living. I think you've come across that. That is that is championed by a organisation called Bioregional, which is based in Hackbridge. They did, I don't know if you've seen the BedZ development. It was the first eco neighbourhood in the world, basically. And they developed along the lines of a set of principles which deliver one planet living, okay, which we'll come to a bit later on in terms of detail anyway. And that's a bottom-up initiative, so it's logically building block by block rather than systematically trying to capture and represent everything in one particular process in that regard. So the logistics of that neutrality debate and therefore, nil or zero contribution to climate change are being fought out, at the moment. But obviously, life goes on, yes, and we don't all wait for the outcomes of these great debates. Some people have the strength of conviction, and they have the, resilience to say, okay, let's try this particular experiment. Let's look for the 40% at least gains, because that's a great advance on where we currently are. So if there are innovations in the meantime which we can bundle up as service applications, then we can load those extra savings on top of that as and when they're ready. And you can do that with an open system, an open source system. You can plug and play in later and just run whatever save the additional application because you're not locked out by proprietary code. So that's what they're working on, the basis that, let's not stop the ball rolling now. Let's load those particular improvements on as and when they feed in, and become options for us to work on. So the physical parameters of, developments are becoming less and less determining in that regard. What's opened up are the digital infrastructure platforms, which allow you to load these things on later in the day or along the particular time frame of your program. Okay. Did that digress too much? Is that okay? Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, but rather than us just talking about we have 100% savings, you can actually point towards various experiments which are going on and being trialled to actually achieve that level of gain. Yeah. And what they're doing is obviously they've already got 40 initiatives which were experienced here and just adding more to them. It's not like they're completely rejecting what's gone before and saying, oh no, that was rubbish, we'll show you how to do it. This is the way we should do it. They're saying, yeah, that's fantastic, we'll use that, but we'll add this, this, and this, because that's what we've learned from these experiments. And that's this collaborative approach, yes, rather than a competitive approach. Competition, obviously, you always have a rival that you try and outperform, yes, and that usually means that there's one winner and there's one loser. Whereas here, everybody's a winner, because they retain their original savings, and then when this all gets sorted out and resolved, those savings get transferred back to these as another innovation process, which they can then build upon as well, rather than seeing that stand and wither and die as a particular standalone initiative. No. This way, we're all part of the same system and can diffuse innovations across the various points or nodes within the system. Okay, so there's some of the very exciting things going on. And the next generation, who are building upon those advances, are here, obviously Hackford, Barcelona again, Stockholm, back to that one because it's such an ongoing initiative with numbers of phases. Rome, I've got anything for Napoli, I'm afraid. Possibly because it's just not hit the public domain. It might be there, I just don't know about it, And all I'm saying is there are the documents in the public domain which support the status of these as the next generation world-class standard bearers. Austria again, Aston Lake again, and also Handler again. But it's again, the different types of interventions, some mixed, some exclusively residential, different population sizes. These used to be the determining factors of settlements. They no longer are. Even the densities are quite varied, as you can see. Turin, 1,740,000 per hectare, whereas some are as low as 240, 32, etc., etc. So the spread of density curve is really extensive. I mean, Turin's speed of 4 is really probably about a third of the city. It's not really a district in a traditional sense. It's a corridor of the city. It's making it an innovation corridor of speed of 4. And this is where most of the transformation of that city will take place over the next 10 or 15 years. But there's a density between 50, 75, 100, and 150, which is suburban, really. It's not really high density in that regard. If anything, Europe wants to be a suburban culture, rather than intensely urban and city-centric culture in terms of the density and the vibrancy of the lifestyle in that way. We're still hanging on to post-war experience, but to try and deliver in a much more efficient way. We'll look at the different emission expectations per capita. Yes. Hackbridge now assumes it can get down to 1.2 tons of carbon per capita emission. Okay. Again, some of the information I've got on the presentation is short. In the moment, it's around about 7 tons, something like that. So it will, if everything goes to plan, meet this particular 8% target reduction. The same with Barcelona, comes down to 1.5. Rose Seaport again around about 1.5, and then we move up to 3, 3.5, 5 tons, etc., etc. They're all gains on what the current situation is, but some of the gains are much more dramatic than others, which hopefully is captured not here, which shows the densities, etc., for the various initiatives, but here. Or even here. Yes, here, yes, and this one here. Next generation with Hackbridge, up to here, as you can see, is meeting its 80% target, in terms of its savings, in terms of carbon emission. And obviously, the energy savings will be 7% its hoped. And that's from the protocol of One Planet Living. Rose Seaport is being quite clever, and just suggesting that it's going to meet the 2040 target set by the European Commission of 60% here. Those experimental gains, which we highlighted a few minutes ago, have been taken out of this measurement because they're defined as experimental and not expected to deliver with any certainty in terms of tangible results. So it's being quite cautious and saying, okay, well, let's leave it to 60 for now, because that's as much as we want to commit to. But in terms of what the early adopters were promoting, these are improvements on that particular level of energy saving and carbon emission. Okay. All right. So again, one of the world-class standard bearers. Why are they improvements? Well, the national level for the UK is 8.5 tonnes per capita. London is 5.8. This particular district of London will be 1.2. Okay. So that's 8% savings, isn't it? Barcelona again 6.8. The city of Barcelona is very low because it has a lot of nuclear energy, it has a lot of renewable recycling as well. Down to 1.5. Rose Seaport again down to 1.5, and then Rome was 2.75 per capita onwards, etc., etc. So why are these measures important as headlines? Well, because of the world-class status of cities measured by emission of carbon in that respect.
Excuse me, question.
Yeah.
But only Royal Seaport improved the storage of energy among them.
Yeah.
Was the only city to improve the storage.
Yes.
So do you think storing energy is the only way to reach the 80% you you'd say before or not?
Yes, a component of it has to be, because the actual expectations from Hackbridge, it's going from 60 to 80. Yeah, there's a storage element which brings it up into the 80% category.
So storaging is an important,
Oh yes,
it's a massive important thing.
Either storage at some central location, which is managed, by an authority, or alternatively storage on site within built envelopes is another option as well, which is obviously controlled by you, the user, the end user.
So storaging in every house.
Yeah, is a possibility. There are innovations in battery storage for homes, as well as for offices, as well as for shops and industries, etc., etc. So they can always have that security of supply. So if the network goes down, they've still got a local storage to rely upon to service their particular needs. That's obviously working on a catastrophic scenario, which is a possibility, yes, and then you'll be able to get your source of energy. And if you've got photovoltaics and you've got wind and all the rest of it, then you can feed that back into your system and store your energy as well. Hospitals, things like this, are very interested in that type of emergency planning system to fuel their particular services that they're expected to provide. That makes sense. Okay. So this is, if you have a performance index emerging on the next generation standards, then world class, according to Siemens Green City Index, which I've got no reason to question in any way whatsoever, is 3 tons per capita. Okay. So if you're emitting less than 3 tons per capita in your city, then you are performing at a world-class standard. Yes. You would have the right to advertise or declare your city as world-class in terms of climate change adaptation strategy, because you're almost neutral. You're not actually neutral. To be neutral, you have to get into this level here, this green parameter, which is defined as climate neutral, which is between 1.0 and 1.5. If you're within that particular measure here, then you're saving 8% on what your previous emission levels were, your particular baseline. And as a consequence of that, you're making a nil contribution to global warming. That's how you square the circle in this respect. That's the equation being balanced out in terms of inputs and outputs. It can be specified as simply as that. That is a very, very, very headline, very highly generalized target to try and meet. But that's why certain cities are driving towards that 80% savings objective. Okay? And of course, if you don't say you're driving towards that 80% saving objective, then how are you going to get money out of the European Union to fund initiatives? Because you've got to tell them that, hey, we're really serious about this. We're trying to, meet what expectations you have, and assemble and bundle together our initiatives to do just that. Okay. So it's a very small club. It's not the C40 club. They're nowhere near climate neutral at the moment. If somebody did an analysis of that, you might not even be able to find what expectations they have in terms of carbon emissions per capita. They may not want to divulge that or put it in the public domain, and therefore not be transparent. That way they would fail the governance test of being open and transparent and accountable in that way. These cities do pass that particular test because you can get information from them based upon their expectations. So if you really want a litmus test of climate neutrality, which is now beyond carbon neutrality or energy efficiency or zero carbon net zero carbon buildings, etc., it's really transformed into debate about climate neutrality. Then keep following, the the Royal Seaport and also Hackbridge in London, because they are the litmus tests, yes. They are the acid test by which we can define, whether this particular concept is transforming into something more real than just merely a set of ideas. Okay. So that way we can make sense of what's going on, as a set of voluntary initiatives by very forward-seeing cities, and seeing, what's going on here, what's it up to, where's it all leading to, why are they doing this, what's the purpose of it. And if once we know that, we can judge them obviously on that basis. But unless we know that, we've got nothing by which to judge their performance by in that regard. So really, when I said that smart cities are searching world-class performance, in a way, it's more extensive than that, isn't it? It's more than what the Siemens Green Index defines as world-class, 3 tons per capita. It's within that particular categorization. It's beneath that. And as a consequence, some of those world-class performers are searching beyond that state and into this space which is called climate neutrality. That way we redeem ourselves as the human race, don't we? We stop messing up our ecosystem, we stop destroying our environment, we take full responsibility for the cosmos in that. And do give the next generation the opportunity to benefit from the proceeds of ours without downloading any of the costs which we generate onto them. The argument is that with industrialization, each generation keeps mortgaging the future. Yes, it keeps storing up problems for the next generation to try and solve, and each subsequent generation gets more and more burden to take on in trying to keep the system running on the principles which it was based upon in that regard. And if we get this particular equation solved and balance the books in that regard, then we will meet the Brundtland definition of sustainable development, which is, to paraphrase, not cheating our children's children, isn't it? If you know the quote. Not downloading costs onto the next generation, which our generation has created. Because it doesn't want to pick up the price of them now, it wants to offset them into the future. Okay. So there's a big moral and ethical, obviously, ambition involved in these grand strategies which are emerging from Europe. Okay, so that's the. I'm going to talk about that tomorrow in about 30 minutes. So, so it will be a very much of a fly through on this. Hey, let's move on. Let's not talk about it. Let's just look at it. Okay. Okay. So what time is it now? It is 12 o'clock, isn't it? Okay. So do you want to move on to another issue straight away, or do you want a small break before we do that?
How long will it be the next?
The next one, I've got two. The second one, which is about indicators, is very short because I was only given 10 minutes to talk on this topic. So, but it is quite dense. It's much more intense than the material presented here. Yeah, that's true. But it is very, very focused. So the messages should be quite, firm and powerful in that regard. So I'll try and run through that in 15 minutes here. Don't let me digress and that sort of thing. But then the second one usually takes about half an hour. The third one, so it takes about half an hour, because this is an application of One Planet Living into the Hackbridge case study, which is the 80% climate neutrality, sort of ambition, which has been stated or has been rolled out at the present time. So that would be 40 minutes, and we've got 55. So we could have a 10-minute break if you wanted to. Yeah? You want a break? Or, no. Okay, we've got. Just follow on. You sure you're up to this, yes? Yeah, okay, okay. I'm questioning whether I am. Okay, let's try to find the next one. quite an intense, process of development in terms of the metrics that are available now to monitor and evaluate the success or otherwise of major projects. Okay, this is urban indicators, morphology, energy consumption, carbon emissions, and built environment. This is one of the key integrations which is taking place at the research level throughout Europe now, yes, and it will be, no doubt, for the next decade or so, due to a number of quite, revealing papers which have been published by these sources that one here. And again, leading projects like that, Bennington Energy Development, Bennington Zero Energy Development, I should say, yeah. Become known as the Hackbridge Project, and then the ability of energy efficient low carbon zones to emerge from that, from this concept of one planet sort of. Well, anyway, let's kick off this idea about urban indicators. There are thousands of papers on urban indicators, yeah, and I challenge anybody to make a lot of sense of it. We seem to be going around in circles at the moment, almost to the point where anything goes, and it's take your pick, it's your choice, and there's very little guidance really on what is a definitive, standard bearer in that regard. But this was quite a useful, I felt anyway, quite a useful sort of statement on urban indicators from this Holden back in 2006, who said basically the indicator systems for guiding and better evaluating the effects of urban development are now in place. Okay. Certain laboratories have emerged as data collectors and information processors and metric providers, which can provide us with that intelligence, is being suggested here. However, their utility is still in question, and the means by which the indicators can encourage a synoptic view that act as levers for strategic change and facilitate sustainable development remains to be discovered. So it's a bit of a great, but yeah, good on this, but not so good on that report, isn't it? Like the usual end of year school report that said, Mark's very good at this, but he's really bad at that, and that sort of, and you have to balance it out and see where things lie. But you're saying, obviously, the systems are in place, we're just not using them very well. I think that's the message that was coming from Holden at this particular point. Yeah. So what she said? She says that referring to use of indicators not as instruments that flag up performances, either as headlines or baselines, but systems of measurement, which capture the complex organic nature of the material under examination. Okay. If you sort of reflect back on what we just looked at, we weren't really talking about headlines, weren't we? How do we capture, in one particular measure, every ambition that defines being smart? And obviously that one headline measure is carbon emissions, in effect, because of its symbolic relationship to other more meaningful things. But with indicator systems, the idea is that we're not just headlining, or baselining, we need to systematically understand, yes, the material significance of each component in that particular process. So that raises a new challenge as well, in terms of complexity that we have to deal with. We're interested in the multitude of data sets and information processes which combine to create this aggregate figure. And we're interested in the transfer, of information and data which leads to that particular headline, rather than just the headline itself. So we're being asked now to not just be the public concerned with the headline, but the experts concerned with the development of the data and the information which supports the assembly of those particular headlines. Okay. And then she says, this is because for Holden, the best indicator systems are natural step and one planet living. There you go. See? Because they get beneath the headline and approximate causality by assigning such powers to the complex organic nature of the material under examination, and relating this to the vital signs of sustainable development. The vital sign in our instance being obviously, carbon emissions. So what Holden is saying quite interestingly is that indicator systems have been abused for the purpose of just representing headlines or baselines. What we need to do is think about indicators as systems of data and information and sources of information, and also data in that respect, and approximate that system to a causal chain of events by assigning certain powers which capture the organic material nature of their content. So we embody them, I suppose, with a material substance which they would otherwise have if they were headlines or baselines. And that's a new sort of reading or representation of indicators, which I think, obviously most people think is quite exciting. Therefore, we're saying, okay, let's look at innovation. Urban indicators as innovation systems. That's basically the message, which ties back quite nicely to what was part of the previous presentation. And people like Salax in France, CSTB Urban Morphology Laboratory there, for the French National State, and also Calorati and MIT. This is Sense Lab. This is exactly what they're doing now. Attaching indicators to the material organic relationship through this concept of morphology, yes, and the evolution of the fabric of the city in terms of this material, content, form, shape, and geometry, and all the rest of it. Okay. So the way they're elevating the headline messages, which we got from the previous section, into a science, to regulate the technological applications. And this is an intermediate stage, which obviously for academics is far more important than anything else in that regard. This is the domain which academics are currently particularly interested in. This is because so-called multi-scalar and cross-cutting urban indicators are said to do something quite profound. I get beneath the headline. Base such measures on energy consumption and calculations on the fabric of city districts, neighbourhoods and blocks, which we're beginning to learn about because obviously we've got the experiments in place. Assign causality by approximating their consumption of energy and emission of carbon to the design, construction, operation and use of such structures. And this is obviously where expert providers, like civil engineers and architects and other expertise, gets involved in that particular process of service delivery. So it becomes a bit more niche, a bit more segmented in terms of understanding not just the process or the ambition or the desire as a set of targets and all the rest of it, but what your particular community of expertise can contribute to that overall process in that respect, and therefore make a difference. Relate these performances to the vital science of sustainable development in a way which not encourages a synoptic representation and one reason that we can grab and understand quite easily, but render the complex organic nature of morphology in a matter that also acts as a lever for strategic change. Again, this has been one of the criticisms of policy in the past, that it's come up with ideas which are unobtainable, yes, because the legacy system cannot respond in a way which is expected, because they are just idealized representations, which don't bear any resemblance to reality. This way they're trying to, again, get a closer relationship between the expectations and the real potential, and therefore not just be clever in imagining this situation, or intelligent in processing the options, but smart in the way that you get a straight line between the expectations and the deliverable, and that will make the application work in practice. And again, the older you get and the more experience you have in failed initiatives along these particular lines, the more meaningful that nuanced distinction between clever, intelligent, smart, etc. becomes. Because it is a way of measuring success or the index. So what are these indicators? Some extracts. These are the current indicator set which make up this new urban morphology, which Salat and others in France have started to share with us as members of the academic community. Yeah. Obviously, land use mobility. Land use. That's the last one.
No.
Yes. So how did that? Okay. This doesn't seem possible, but it has happened.